Arise business analyst, Bode Ososanmi, shares his thoughts on this issue. It's good to have you again. Very uncomplimentary article on Nigeria yesterday, but is Bloomberg fair in this assessment?
Well, good to be with you, Neil. Like you rightly said, the problem of poverty, particularly in Africa, is assuming alarming proportions. And the article on Nigeria that we read was an opinion which tried to establish that poverty may be on course to remain extraordinarily high, except we begin to see a very strong pro-growth environment that can diffuse what he described as Nigeria's time bomb. Now, if you look at the performance indicators, why they are raising these issues, the thinking is the president has quite an uphill task given where what he's having to deal with. Take, for example, foreign direct investment has been quite low, down from 5 billion in 2014 to like 2 billion in 2018. The unemployment rate, I'm sure you're aware, that's like 23%, again, up from 6% in 2014. The inflation rate, which is the green there, used to be 8% in 2014, now 11%, and it looks like that is gradually coming down. GDP growth, which is an area of concern, used to be 6% in 2014, and now is 2% thereabouts. The target for the central bank is about 2.75% in 2019, which is also way behind our rate of population increase, and also behind the number that the target that we need to begin to dent the poverty and unemployment, which is more like 4 to 6% GDP growth. Debt service to revenue, the percentage there used to be 27% in 2014. Now we're talking of about 60% in 2018. The World Economic Forum competitiveness ranking, there was an improvement there, mainly because of improvements in ease of doing business. We used to rank 127th. In 2018, we ranked 115. Transparency International corruption perception in 2014 we were ranked 136. We've gone further down in 2018 to 144. I think that is also because although the president is renowned to have a very high personal integrity, but his approach to fighting corruption has been more of a strongman approach rather than that of improving institutions or strengthening governance in the key sectors impacted by corruption, like the oil and gas sectors. So what this essentially is saying is that there is a lot of work to be done. Bloomberg, in a very amusing way, described the president as Mr. Go Slow, and he needs to go much, much quicker this time around if he's going to really achieve the objectives. But there are other views. Take, for example, financial derivatives. In their own assessment, they say the government is somewhat on track according to their latest review. Let me read the summary. They say, in spite of being blighted by soaring debt service and constrained by negative labor productivity, the Nigerian economy is likely to turn the corner in 2019. That's quoting Financial Derivatives LBS briefing. That's their latest briefing that came out last week. Although they do talk about a delicate fiscal position as a result of the wage increase and the pressure that puts on inflation and the fiscus, given the fact that that doesn't correspond to any improvement in productivity. But it's a lot of work to be done, and analysts are watching for speed, for boldness, and for a new, different reform orientation.
Indeed. Now, President Buhari also pointed at the problem of inequality and poor social inclusion at the World Economic Forum. North Africa is driving terrorism on the continent. What can be done to address this?
Well, all will agree with Mr. President on his conclusion that the huge inequality, the gulf of difference between those who have and those who don't have in Africa is a major, major driver of the dissatisfaction that stokes the terrorism we see. There are many things that can be done. It's a combination of several things. One, of course, is to improve infrastructure, to empower, of course, those who live in the rural areas more, attracting more investment and economic growth in employment-sensitive areas, particularly particularly in the rural areas, something has to be done as far as the economy is, because the cake has to be bigger to be shared to them as well. Now, the other issue, of course, is the reprioritization of government expenditure and rebalancing expenditure mindset to give more importance to education. Education is, I think, is the most important area in dealing with inequality, because that is what empowers the populace. Those who have will always be able to educate their people better, and the gap will get even wider if we don't do anything about education. We find money to fight a war, but the inequalities is a huge war, and we have to find the money to educate those who are vulnerable and to ensure that we give them the very basic education. They're doing it in South Africa, they're doing it in Ghana. I just can't understand why it can't be done in Nigeria. At least free education for those who cannot afford it up to secondary level. That would have a huge impact, instead of just talking about reducing inequality. And the way you do this is you spend less. You spend less on perhaps defense, spend less on subsidies that help the middle class. And that's what they do also in other places. They don't spend as much on subsidies in South Africa or in the UK or any other, or even in Egypt. And that's essentially because they need that money to look after the vulnerable in the society, and these ones are given, for example, they would have free passes to go on buses, for example, and they will be helped one way or the other to deal with some of the challenges of increased costs of transportation, even as you eliminate some of these subsidies. The other thing you do to reduce some of these inequalities, of course, is address taxation. That's a big area. There's need to reform taxation to cut out the abuse and get tax to GDP ratio to at least 20%. In OECD countries, normally that ratio is over 40%. In South Africa, the ratio is about 40%. In Nigeria, the ratio is under 10%. The money has to come from somewhere. So the wealthy are cheating the poor by not paying the taxes, because this is the money that is used for healthcare, used to look after mothers having children who cannot afford the maternal care and so on. And while you're not paying your tax in one area, you are contributing to the death of someone who is not able to go to a proper hospital. So these are some of the issues. Finally, you also need to strengthen your institutions.
Bode, what are the initial indications in terms of the outlook for the Nigerian economy as President Buhari starts a new term, you think?
Well, if you look at the numbers and where we're at, the indicators, particularly if you look at output, is somewhat positive. In the sense that you have oil production at 1.74 million barrels per day and somewhat flattening, slightly increasing. And you also have the Purchasing Managers Index, the latest one, coming up to about 557.4. But the real challenge is in GDP production. The central bank is targeting 2.7 thereabouts, which is still low given the huge poverty issues. And what many analysts are saying is that we do need a significantly improved reform tempo in terms of speed, in terms of boldness, and in terms of how all-encompassing the reform is, to be able to dent what was described as a demographic time bomb, and that is the very high poverty. But it's still early, but clearly the analysts are watching for this uptick in tempo, which is yet to come.
Very good. Now, in view of the reforms being canvassed, can we look at more specific on the areas analysts are pointing at as needed the most attention to get the growth needed to dent the poverty plague?
Well, there are several areas that have been mentioned. Of course, electricity generation is something that almost needs a war room approach in terms of being tackled. And it's important to move from populist policies to a more reform-oriented policy. And I think that's something that this government needs to understand, that populism is good for elections, but in terms of really taking moving the country forward, that's a different area altogether. Then, of course, boosting non-oil revenues through better tax compliance and enforcement, sorting out things like the gridlock in the ports, and of course, the issue of the currency, ensuring that it creates an environment that is more attractive for investment, either by working out some semi-managed floating approach, which is significantly gives more comfort, particularly for investors, than what you have now. So these are some of the things which have been mentioned before. Broadly, economic reform, making very fundamental changes in how we do things, so that we get growth back into some of the sectors where there's a lot of potential, and most importantly, get back foreign direct investment up, reduce unemployment, and then, of course, deal with poverty. But the issue is, if you don't get growth up to like 6%, we're not talking about 3% here, 6%, and you can get that only through very, very significant reform initiatives. If you can get growth up to 6%, then we really will be going around in the same, going around in circles.
Indeed, I do agree with the war room concept, or the state of emergency status for the power sector as well. Now, IMF Chief Christine Lagarde is expected at the World Bank meeting starting tomorrow in Washington to paint a bleaker picture on global economic growth. How will this affect a country like Nigeria?
Well, I think the message from Christine Lagarde is that the fun is about to be over. If you recall, 2014, Nigeria had growth of about 6% GDP. A lot of that was helped by the accommodative environment and a lot of the easing going on then. There was a lot of money that was coming into emerging markets. The environment is somewhat a bit tighter, maybe slightly slacking down in terms of tightness, but clearly it's a tougher environment. And if you get the slowdown that is predicted in countries like China, certainly that will impact oil prices, because demand will be hit. Although oil prices are still good now, $70 per barrel. A slowing down in the global economy, as was predicted, will certainly bring that number down, and that will impact countries like Nigeria. It will also make it tougher to attract global investment in a slowing economy. So I think the key message for Nigeria from the World Bank's directions in terms of how they see the economy is that it's going to be tougher, and the imperative to do more reform is even higher. She called it fixing the roof. For us, it looks like we're still painting the cracks.
Indeed. Bode Ososanmi, many thanks for your perspective on Nigeria as well as IMF.